Could you please call roll?
Miss Armstrong,
Here.
Dr. Baker,
Here.
Mr. Brown,
Here.
Mr. Kleppel,
Here.
Miss Shannon,
Here.
Miss Soteropoulos,
Here.
Miss Vasquez.
Here.
Thank you, Tammy. Everyone is present and accounted for. Before we move into our meeting agenda, we'd like to take a moment of silence and recognize that many in our community, and especially in our school community, are struggling and grieving heavily, and we'd like to take a moment to just gather our thoughts and send out our wishes and prayers and thoughts for those in our community who are struggling with grief. And as we move into our meeting, may our thoughts always be centered on our students and their needs and on our families. Thank you all. I need to approve the agenda. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Shannon Soteropoulos. Tammy, would you call roll?
Miss Shannon,
Yes.
Miss Soteropoulos,
Yes.
Miss Armstrong,
Yes.
Dr. Baker, Dr. Baker,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Kleppel,
Yes.
Miss Vasquez.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries 7-0. Can you make sure, I see a note from a panelist that says they can't hear. Will you just make sure the panelists can hear? That will move us into agenda item 3, which is reports, new business, which is the reason for our meeting this evening. This is item A, which is a review and discussion of the status of construction projects and funding resources. Again, this is a report only, not actionable this evening. I will turn this over to you, Ms. Linda Matowski.
Since I'm the only one using this mic tonight, I'm going to go ahead and take my mask down for the time being, since there's a lot of detail here. I wanted to thank the board tonight, typically, and also ROC. This was a previously scheduled Finance Committee meeting. Based on the need to continue moving forward with being able to demonstrate financial transparency, we thought it would be appropriate at this time to bring both the board, the ROC committee, which is the Referendum Oversight Committee, as well as the board's Finance Committee together, so that everyone could hear this information at the same time, kind of walk through the presentation at the same time. The Finance Committee members and ROC Committee members that are on this call, you will not be able to speak into the meeting since this is a board meeting, but you can type your questions into the chat boxes. Seth Hansen is here tonight. He's going to monitor that, so as questions come in and there's a sort of an appropriate pause point, he's going to start asking those questions. And if several of you are asking the same types of questions, he'll consolidate that down in, but it will allow you then to be able to ask questions without the board's questions and answer period being impacted from a board meeting standpoint. So one of the things we wanted to do tonight when we were going to meet to talk about this is to really provide an update on where the construction project schedules are at with respect to the financing. So ROC has continually, and the board has continually seen via ROC committee meetings, updates on where the projects are at, sort of the schedule of how things are going, the scope, updated pictures, information with respect to construction. Typically, there's 1 or 2 pages towards the end of those committee meetings where we really talk about finance. And given everything that's happened over the last couple of months, it definitely made sense at this point to bring everyone back together to re-review really where the finances are at in terms of both COVID, updated just sort of global finance issues, state finance issues, and then come forward with a recommendation from my chair with respect to where I see us being able to proceed going forward as we look at financing for these projects. So again, quick history on the agenda or quick notes on the agenda. We're going to go through some historical funding considerations. So these are really a comparison between the last March ROC meeting where there was actually a more detailed financial discussion that occurred, bring it forward to today, also work it a different way, right? So those of us that are new, for example, that are coming into this with a fresh set of eyes, a lot of times, sometimes it's handier to just simply say, what have I actually got available and what have I got left to spend, and kind of walk it backwards that way. Talk about when the project funding is going to be needed with respect to schedules. I want to do a brief conversation around the 1% sales tax and kind of give an update there, as well as talk about the downtown TIF, because that figured prominently in some previous conversations with respect to financing. Then go through some overview of options and my recommendations. And then I want to talk a little bit about the IPA project itself and walk through some considerations, because obviously that project in and of itself, the board is going to be looking at some information as it comes into its December board meeting. So it's an opportunity for us to kind of refresh everybody with respect to where that's at. In the back, in an appendix, is just some general information about the district's fund balances, revenue expenditure, surpluses over the last several years, so you've got some context with respect to where the district is at. As we start talking about the components of the construction budget, I wanted to make sure that everybody was straight on sort of the separation of where these budgets and this conversation comes from. So the board has authorized what I would consider the contractual budget for these projects. So these are the opportunities where Elizabeth will come forward. She will have legal contracts, she'll have the CM contracts or the subcontracts, and she is asking the board for a specific dollar amount to be approved. When she's run into situations in the past, which have come up, where she's had to increase those budgets, she has to come back to the board for an action item to be able to increase those budgets. Right now, the current budget approval for all of the construction budgets combined is that $264 million number. The expenses, when we have these contractual budgets, are actually coming out of Fund 60, which is all of our capital projects funds. The C&M contingency and the owner contingency play in between, and we can talk more about that, but that's where that lives as it relates to the overall budget. In addition to that, the district, through its regular annual operating budgeting activity, has created a series of off-budget expenditures which show up in either O&M or through capital projects that allow it to do some things that maybe weren't in the original budget. And those are smaller dollar amounts. Right now, we've spent about $2 million. Typically, it's things like overtime for staff for moving, smaller expenses maybe for storage, things like that that come up where we really need to do it for the project's sake, but it isn't necessarily a part of what was legally established with respect to the construction managers through the construction side of the project. So now we're going to get in, really what I want to do is a comparison between where everybody was at in March, which is pre-COVID, to where everybody is at today. This is just the revenue side of it. The next page is going to be the expenditure side of it. So those of you that were here in March, remember when Guy did the very long spreadsheet. What we did is we took the very long spreadsheet and we sort of reestablished it so that it was more up and down and it was a little easier to follow to do the comparison. So you can see in that top section where we're talking about the bond sales, the bond proceeds, all of the pieces that affected the bond and the bond sales. Basically, we're maybe $250,000 short of where we thought we were going to be. That's a combination of having some expenses that were associated that were not taken into consideration during the 2017 bond sale, as well as sort of the adjustment of interest as we're looking at where we think interest income is going to play into this. The second piece of revenue from a revenue stream standpoint, so the district had bonds and bond sales that were a revenue stream. They had sales tax, that 1% sales tax revenue. So the analysis that was done in March didn't take into consideration a few things that had already happened or were about ready to start happening. So the original document that was presented to ROC had almost $10 million, $9.5 million worth of 1% sales tax money attributable to the projects. In reality, there's only about 2.9. So there's a little bit of a difference there between what the sales tax was going to be able to provide. The factors that are there include the original estimate to get to that $9.5 million assumed a 5-year construction cycle. Well, the construction cycle is only 3 years. So right off the bat, we've got a little bit of loss that's occurred simply because we've got a shorter time frame with which we're handling construction. There was an original $1.8 million that had already been allocated back in fiscal 2019 to do ongoing construction or ongoing repair work, capital repair work, to several of the district's buildings, mostly roofs, and there was some bleacher repair work that was done. Those were things that were a part of that long-term capital improvement plan that the board had authorized, and some of that money from sales tax had already been designated for that purpose. So that takes some of the money off the table. Additionally, now that we're in COVID, right now to date, we're about $500,000 short of our revenue estimate anyways. So all of those factors, when you contribute them in, give us a revenue decrease, if you will, of about $6.5 million. Then we start talking about the operating reserve situation. So the board had, right at the very beginning of the referendum cycle, committed the $25 million. So we're going to do $25 million. We're going to come at it a little bit different. There'll be $24 million transferred out. What we found in food service is a little bit of a difficult piece here. So in the ROC presentation, food service was presented as a $2 million contribution. State Board only recognized $1.7 million of that money. I also cannot transfer money out of food service under legal circumstances. So that money has to stay in food service. So I can't actually pull it out. So what we're going to do is we're going to reduce the amount that the ed fund is going to transfer out in order to accommodate the fact that I'm actually paying for something out of food service, which is contained within the ed fund. And then the third piece is the prior property acquisition expenses. So there was really no net change there. We knew we were going to do that. That prior property actually was paid for out of the education fund. And so it just balances itself out. So the combination of all of those brings us to a revenue shortfall that's a little over $8 million. When we go to the expenditure side, now we're talking about revenue that we're missing. These are expenditures that are starting to creep in that we just have to simply account for. So I've highlighted in pink rows that are really associated with expenses that the board is going to start to see or expenses that, based on experience, we think probably need to be built into any kind of budgeting conversation as it relates to the projects. So you can see Central High School right now as a project is pretty much on budget. However, we've got the Central North Fields project that's still yet to come. Having done 2 fields, almost 3 when you take into consideration Spalding, we know that the original budgeted amount for fields probably needs to be increased simply because fields are tricky work to do. You don't know what you're going to find when you get in there. If we have cost overruns like we did in McKinley, we're going to need some sort of a placeholder in the instance that we do need to actually have a larger budget for that particular project. The biggest project right now that's sort of weighing on everybody is Centennial High School. So the board is aware, over the summer we had issues with the facade at Centennial. We've had some additional issues that have come in as we have started doing renovation work at Centennial. All of this goes to the age and condition of the existing building. These were unforeseen circumstances. The net result is the district's contingency money is exhausted. So we need an additional budget increase. We're going to ask for 2.4 million. The net effect is 2.2 with respect to the budget in order to basically reestablish that owner's contingency and see us through the rest of the Centennial project. Dr. Howard, everything it turned out exactly the way we wanted it to, and any of the remaining contingency on that project has been absorbed into other projects. Edison is the newest project we're getting started with. We already know, because the board's already adopted the increase in the budget for Edison at its sort of base, if you will, because as they went out to bid, those bids just came in higher than expected. What we didn't count on over the last couple of weeks is, in the course of doing the renovation work at Edison, there was an additional $900,000 that's been estimated. We're still working through sort of finalizing those numbers, but we've got some unforeseen hazmat issues that are sitting in that building that are going to need to be addressed. So we're going to be coming to the board in January, once we have a chance to finalize all those numbers, with a request to increase the Edison budget. South Side, again, it's completed, came in on budget, not very much that was left in contingency. IPA is the new school, so what you see for the March number is actually what was adopted by the board from the original referendum estimate amount that was started with, plus the March board approval to get you to the $24,330,000. What we're wanting the board to consider is the fact that, based on when we're doing it and based on what we've seen in other projects, there's a need to consider a pre-bid contingency increase. So this is the stuff that, as you're getting ready to go to bid with final design, you realize you're not going to be able to value engineer much more than where you're at. So does it make sense to assume that we're probably going to get bids that are going to come in higher? Then there's a second piece of this, which is, as we get into that project, do we need to look at having the board think from a budgeting standpoint about increasing the project contingency in and of itself from the current 5% up to 10%. So the percentages feel bigger, but if you think about the scope of the project at IPA in the existing building, and you think about what's been happening on the contingency with some of the other buildings built during similar periods, so think Centennial, it probably would be appropriate for the board to consider the fact that we are going to need contingency in excess of that smaller 5% number. McKinley Fields came in, we got budget approval, but if you look, the budget did have to get increased that extra $120,000. Spalding came in on budget, so the net change to all these budget changes really reflects out to about $6 million that we're thinking make more sense to have conversations about with respect to where the expenditure side of the budget still has to go to finish up the projects. What's not included in here is the possibility of the partnership with the Park District to address the Spalding tennis courts. That's a conversation with the board that's been going on for a while. It's being revisited with COVID as all of the park districts in the county are looking for additional outside spaces to be able to work with residents. So in summary, sort of a quick back of the envelope look is we've got revenue shortfalls of about $8 million, project increases of 6. So what we really need to do is to find enough resources to handle $14 million in total. Again, those updated budget information pieces. So what this would do as you walk through this is sort of give you a sense of how the budget is moving in total. So the originally adopted budget of 264 million, almost 265, is going to, there's a request for the board to consider in December for another 3.1 million, which is, or actually through January, which is both the Edison project and the Centennial project, which gives us a new contractual budget of 268 million. The previously unexpended budget, which is sitting out there, plus we've got some new additional budget requests, which are all those additional pink items, which would take the total budget overall to about a $272 million budget. So this is the other way of looking at it for those of you that would be coming in late to a project, that we're not a part of ROC, and probably for finance committee members, this is a more sensible way of looking at it because this is how you would see it. You take everything you've got available, cash on hand currently, everything you've expended to date, you take the original project budget, and then you look at where you're short. So that gets us to about 9 million. Then when you start adding in the additional requests that are starting to come forward to the board, you get back to basically that same $14 million number. So one is the comparison. The first 2 pages were really the comparison to how March gets to November. This is another way of looking at it, which is a real-time analysis of just saying, what do I have left from a money standpoint? What do I need to spend from a money standpoint? And then knowing what's coming forward from capital projects from a construction standpoint, what else do I still need to add? So when is the funding needed? Basically, construction is slated to run through summer, late fall of '22, going into maybe the punch list items getting cleaned up as we get through fiscal '23. So remember, fiscal years start July 1. So when we're talking about going into '23, we're talking about the cleanup and the closure of projects from July of '22 through probably March of '23 as we sort of walk through the closure and the punch list items. And you can sort of see the target amount of money that needs to be spent. This is a super rough estimate, but basically allows for us to continue the projects. So I'm going to stop there and ask if people have questions.
Board members, do you have any questions thus far? Elizabeth?
Yes, thank you. I have a question on the, I guess it was on slide 4. Oh, maybe that's not it. Yes, it is on slide 4. When you were talking about the decreased revenue from the sales tax,
Yep.
so it was projected that we would receive about $9.5 million, and when in actuality we're receiving $2.9 million. One of the reasons for that, number 2 says $1.8 million capital maintenance improvement plan expenses were also charged. So I understand that that money was supposed to be set aside, or at least that's how I currently understand it. That money was supposed to be set aside for like roof repair and so on. So did that really impact the revenue? Like, are we actually getting less money, or is it that we're still getting that same amount of money, but we can't route it to the new construction projects? We have to route it to a different fund.
Yep, so you got it right at the end. So we won't get quite 9.48 because we're missing money because of COVID. But what ended up happening with the money that did start coming in is that we had allocated 1.8 already to doing the roof projects and some of the bleacher projects. So that reduced the amount of money that actually was going to get used for construction projects, the referendum construction projects. So it's not that the money went away, it's that we had less of it to put towards construction projects.
Okay. So I think it was about 13% or so is actually, we're receiving about 13% less than we thought we would.
Correct.
We're getting more money than this. It's just going to another.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you.
Is 2023 the expected completion of all school construction under the referendum?
With the possible exception, if we run into problems doing centennials, we've got some issues as we're working through the centennial schedule. The central north fields, because of timing for putting down sod or, getting those fields ready to go to play with weather, because those are outdoor projects, so that may push or delay certain things. But the anticipated completion for, I would say, the majority of all that referendum project work is over that summer. Other questions? Okay.
Kathy?
So just building off of that, I'm just curious if those projects end up being pushed out, would the cash flow requirements also get pushed out?
Some of the cash flow requirements would get pushed out, but not a significant amount because of the size of those projects. They're smaller in scope, so yes, the cash flow would get pushed out, but not enough to sort of address what is coming really in 21, 22 as we start working through the numbers.
How come you can't use a 5-year instead? Why do you have to use the 3-year and not the 5-year?
So we'll get to that when we talk about the sales tax, but there were, so one of the issues that comes up with the sales tax has to do with that legal requirement for how we handled the debt service portion of this and the reserve requirement, which really then at the end of the day is only kicking off $1 million a year. So I'll show you when we get to that point, because Seth's been working really hard on this because this has been real critical for us, is making sure we understand when exactly we will be able to access that money. So the other part of the sort of base problem was that there was this, for just average approximate numbers, I'm going to use $9.5 million. There was an assumption over 5 years you'd get $9.5 million. What I really needed was $9.5 million over 3 years, because that's really the cash flow for the projects, not 5 years, which means I would have to actually push everything out, and that wasn't going to happen. So we have a cash flow piece that came into play here as well, which is that I really actually have to spend it in 3 years, not 5.
And are you starting to see these pieces as you're truing up the budgets?
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I figured. Okay.
All right.
Any other questions?
Any other questions?
Bruce has, what is the timeline for the 14 million need? How can or will we spread that out over the next 3 fiscal years?
So we can talk through that. That's part of the reason I did the sort of when is the estimated funding need. If you go back to that slide on page 7, right? And you start looking at what do I actually have left in the bank? I only have 104 million in the bank right now. So then if you go the other direction and you start looking at, well, so now I need to roll almost 100 million of that, 108 million of that by the end of 22, which is July of 2022, I'm not going to have enough to cash flow with just what I've got in the bank. So we can squeak it, but it's tight, and that we don't want to be there if we're trying to do construction. If for some reason, especially, one of the positives of COVID, there are not many, but one of the ones that has been helpful is not having students in the buildings, right? Because it's allowed us to continue to push forward with construction. We want to do that because our very large neighbor to the other side of us, which has paused all of their construction at any moment in time, is going to say, we want to get started again. And once the university goes back into full construction mode, it's going to get harder and harder for us to get labor, to get supplies, materials, contractors, all of that stuff becomes affected. So to the extent that we can keep the projects moving, we want to continue to do that.
That makes sense. Okay.
Okay.
Oh, Heather has her hand up.
I think I know this answer, but I'd like just for clarifying purposes ask, these are different accounts. This would not do anything to interfere with hiring of staff, hiring of teachers, correct? Like, I want to make sure that's clarified, that as we're approaching different ways we're cutting these dollars and finding ways to find this money, it won't affect our staff or our staff hirings in any way. Is that correct?
It is correct depending upon whatever option you choose. So one of the options that in here, that's contained in here, as we sort of talk through, and you'll see my recommendation rationale, is I don't want to do that, because if I have to pay for this entirely out of fund balance, we could do it, right? It puts cash flow at risk, and we'll talk about that in a little bit too. But it also puts the district at risk for trying to do program expansion, hiring, different kinds of opportunities that it may want to take in the ed fund.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, so continuing on, let's talk sales tax. Okay, so the original 1% sales tax was really assumed, that 9.5 million number was assumed to go over 5 years as we collected it. The problem is we needed it in 3 years. Also, there was a need to clarify, which hadn't happened until May or June, this issue of the fund balance reserve aspect of it, or the debt reserve aspect of it. In the documents, when the district entered into these transactions, there's a covenant that requires the district to have essentially 3 payments in advance, always sitting in reserve. And those payments had to be there so that we could, when the auditors come in to do the audits, when the bondholders are looking at our financials, they can point to that, and we have managed to basically obey the covenants in the borrowing documents. Failure to do that carries some significant risk, including bondholder lawsuits, because you're basically in default of your transaction. So when we redid this with the attorneys, so this has been round and round with the attorneys for months as we've been trying to work through this, and the bond lawyers and local attorney and Stiefel Nicholas, when we were working through this with them, we needed to be able to keep that debt service basically reserve at a particular level, which everybody agreed to, which we now have put into place, along with sort of the rules and the measurement for that. Additionally, when those that original 9.5 estimate was thrown out there, it was pre-COVID. So it was presuming that the economy was going to continue to grow, that the university was going to be filled to overfilled with students, that parents were going to suddenly have free cash to be able to come in and see their kids all the time and spend lots and lots of money in the county. And pretty much everybody in the county was going to spend lots of money in the county. It did not anticipate that we would have the shutdown we had over the spring, and this sort of ebbing and flowing of shutdowns that we're now seeing now. So that has thrown cash flow receipts off. If the board recalls, when we did the budgets over the summer, I said we were going to start with a 30% projection just to make sure we were safe, and then continue to update it as we started to get receipts in. So we've just now started to see the receipts. So the state sort of takes a little bit of a pause over the summer with respect to collection and reporting. They're starting to get back, they're just now starting back in their normal reporting. What it looks like is, based on the current receipts, we're running about 13% below. So not the 30%, but 13% below. So Seth has started updating pro forma projections with respect to what we think we're going to see. But even at a 13% loss, we're still short of what we thought originally we had built, which actually was growth, not necessarily the deficit. And originally, we were going to use all of that $9.5 million. As we talked about, we've already used 1.9 of it. So that comes off the top. We have to keep some money for the reserve, so that comes off the top. We shorten up the amount of time that we've got available to actually utilize the money for construction purposes. That's what sort of brought that back down a little bit. One of my recommendations to the board is going to be that we not actually use the money that we've got available. So we're going to have 2.9 million. It'll come due February of 22. That's the first time we can touch it. But what we don't want to do is use it for this group of referendum construction projects, because we have no other vehicle to do regular, ongoing, long-term capital maintenance projects for the district if we start using that money. And I think, based on the next set of recommendations with respect to how to work through the $14 million shortfall, it would make sense for us, given the February 22 availability date, to use this money to apply towards planning our long-term capital improvement plan program and keep that money exactly the way everybody had expected it to be used, which is really for ongoing maintenance. So right now, this is the current historical tax receipts. I know every once in a while the board likes to see this from an updated standpoint. What's in the colored sections are our projections for each of those years. If it's in white without any kind of shading, we have actually received that, so you can sort of see what we've been doing and how we've been looking at things. Here's how the cash flow itself coming off the sales tax is appropriate for us to be able to use, and the timing for it to be able to be used. So you can see really in the chart at the bottom, it sort of goes right to the heart of the matter. You can see when we're calculating the receipts, when the debt service payments have to get made, and that minimum balance for statutory requirements that has to be held, and then the surplus at the statutory calculation date, and then our ability to release that money. So the $2,862,000 isn't going to be available for the district to pull out and start using until we get to February of 22. That's when we will have enough covered. We will have had that $12 million built in that surplus amount that we can now start to use. And once we have that, we will have built up what we need to have built up, and we will no longer have to hold back so much money. Unfortunately, based on the receipts and the debt service payment, you can see that the debt service payment ramps up when we get into that February 23 date. And so we've really only got $1 million a year after that that's going to be available for us to pull out legally to be able to apply for long-term capital improvement planning, which is not a lot, but it's better than nothing. And if we come through COVID, if that surplus starts to grow and we can pull more out, then we can pull it out. But we can't pull it out until February of every year. So if you think about it from a construction time standpoint, a budgeting standpoint, that means we can, for example, in the 22, that February 22, Paul will be able to start budgeting using that money in the 2020 or in the 2022 budget, but he won't be able to actually use it until the spring of that 22. So he'll plan the projects over the summer of 21. He'll start bidding and thinking about projects as he gets into the winter part of 22 for activity and work that he can do in the spring of 22 going into the summer. So you'll have a lot of different, there's a lot of things that happen at different times that we have to try to monitor. That's part of the reason we always have dates on some of this stuff to make sure we can remember like what happens when. But that's quite a ways out yet still for him to be able to start using that money. And by then I will already be fairly complete with a lot of the construction projects. So it makes more sense to have O&M use that money to do their regular work on an ongoing basis than it does for us to try to pull it out, only because at $1 million a year, it would take a while to recoup that enough to get sizable projects done for the rest of the district. All right, any more questions on the sales tax? Okay.
So Ed asked, will COVID not result in lower expected receipts from the 1% sales tax?
So COVID is resulting in a 13% decline from what would have been a neutral projection, right? No growth projection. We're 13% down, which is better. In the finance world, we call that an improving loss situation. Instead of being down 30%, we're only down 13% if we were neutral from year to year. If in fact, we start to see better than normal growth, that just helps us as we get further out there. But it's going to take a lot of growth to get us to do something sooner than February of 22. February of 2022 really is, it would take a lot of work if you think mathematically about it for us to be able to get enough improvement to be able to get that money out faster. It may give us a slightly bigger surplus as we get into 23 and 24.
Quick question. Maybe Chris can speak to this. Janina, Kathy, you were here. When we were working on the sales tax before referendum, I am recalling that there were supposed to be newer funds in 2035. Am I misremembering? Am I not thinking? It was either 2035 or 2038, and this is what we were trying to get to until those years. Is anybody recalling that, Chris?
I think it's actually a little sooner than that. It's the 1% are from the Cary Busey projects, and the other projects are paid off, and we would start getting a larger chunk because we're no longer paying off those projects. Right. We're realizing new dollars at that point.
Correct.
And I want to say that's like 33, 32 maybe even when those start to roll off.
35. It's
Is it 35?
2035 is what they're saying. But yeah, thank you, Chris. So is there a big transition? But that's so far out. It's not even something we should even, but it was in the tickle of the back of my head knowing that there was money to come. Okay, thank you.
And again, I think if we get into the discipline habit of using that money annually to help with long-term capital improvement plans, so we have a robust 5-year plan. Every year we're looking at it and we're rolling it a year. That gives O&M something with which to use to plan so that we're keeping up the buildings that we're building right now.
Which I think was always the expectation of that. It just, you're implementing it and truing that up actually helps as we move
Put a
forward.
line in it, yep.
Okay, thank you.
Seth, anything else?
Elizabeth?
For when we're talking about the sales tax, what kinds of sales go under that sales tax? Is anything that's sold by a local business? Are some types of businesses excluded from that? In other words, when we're encouraging
there's
people
a
to
host-
shop locally, like this impacts our schools. So what's covered under this?
So it's everything in Champaign County, right? So Champaign County is a unit, a big unit. Any businesses that are involved in Champaign County we get access to that sales tax, so that half-cent tax or 1 cent tax that's applied on there. So in a big, broad brush, it's really a lot of the things that you would go to the store to buy. When you go buy toilet paper and paper towels, when you buy boxes of bush beans, right? You pay a tax on it. There are some things that are excluded right now that are on the e-shopping side, the e-purchasing side. Some things are coming back in. So if you go, the Wayfair decision was really critical for the state. So if you go to Wayfair as a website and you buy at Wayfair, and you know how you type in your address, they have to pick up your tax, right? So if you go to Macy's and you order online at Macy's or Target, they pick up your address and you pay the tax. If you go to Amazon and they are using a third-party resale firm, that tax money still goes up to the state. So the state isn't necessarily releasing that out. Now, there is pending legislation with the Department of Revenue that would allow local governments to also pick up part of the Amazon piece of this, but it hasn't quite made its way through yet. I would expect that given COVID and some of the other things, it won't take the Municipal League long before they start trying to see if they can get their fingers on that. So it's taxes like that. When people come into Champaign for one of the football games and they go to the bars, they go to the restaurants, they go to hotels, there's county taxes. That's part of what's coming through that part of the process too. So when big tourist events get canceled, where people would come in and maybe they're buying shirts or they're buying tchotchkes, right, to take home, and mementos, those kinds of things have a tax associated. So that's why it's been so critical that the people are able to continue to receive that money. The positive is it's only down that 13%, which means people are making up for it. They're still shopping.
Okay, so
Sure.
a lot of online shopping is covered, but all the more reason to shop local.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you.
Another question from Neil. What amount is considered reasonable capital improvement budget per year for Unit 4?
Yep.
It was a question that Elizabeth Stegmeyer is going to answer.
When we put together the capital improvement plan, we had budgeted about $2 million a year. We felt, I think most people know it's never enough. You can always do more, but we felt pretty comfortable at $2 million a year. We could do some HVAC work every year. We could do, the things like bleachers. We could keep the gyms going. We could upgrade lights, hit a roof, every couple of years. So at $2 million a year, we felt good about the 5-year plan. And this past year, as Linda mentioned, we did 1.8. We had to pull back a little bit just because COVID hit and there were some other changes, but if we could get back on that pace of, $2 million a year, we would feel pretty comfortable with that.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Okay. All right, downtown TIF. So this gets a little arcane, so I'm going to try to do this as simply as I can because it involves property taxes, which are never anybody's favorite topic. But back prior to the referendum process getting started, the district was aware that the downtown TIF, so this is the main core downtown TIF, was set to expire. So they knew that they were going to also get basically incremental property tax increases that were going to come into the district as a result of that TIF expiring. So when a TIF goes on the books, the property value in that TIF for the taxing bodies stays the same. Okay, so the TIF, this is an economic incentive to help the people that are located inside the TIF maintain a lower property tax expense, with sort of the benefit being kicked off, which is why you see a lot of municipalities use TIF in downtown entertainment areas, downtown sales areas, because what they're hoping is that regeneration through the TIF of that property helps to support additional hotel tax, sales tax, income tax, because you could potentially be bringing in people to the community that are, states like them, right? So young, affluent people that are coming in and want to live downtown and want that cool new condo, oftentimes are buying into a TIF district, right? So they put that condo in a TIF district. The taxing bodies that are a component of that TIF meet on an annual basis. They call it a joint review board. We sit down, we look at all the TIFs. The city of Champaign has quite a few TIFs. All of them have a very specific economic purpose, and they are really designed to help Champaign do the improvement. And the idea is a sort of if but for, right? So you do the analysis, you know that the downtown is going to grow, you know it's going to make the world a better place, you know it's going to kick off additional growth, it's going to allow properties that are maybe outside the TIF but adjacent to the TIF to also grow, which then helps the property tax base. And if you actually look at the history of Champaign and the properties around the downtown TIF, things did improve. Those property values started to come up, and we as a taxing body directly benefit when a TIF district does well. In this particular case, when the TIF comes off the roll, what we say is we have to be careful we recapture all of that new property. So if you actually go back in and you look at the district's records, if you look at the city of Champaign's records, you will see that they actually, when the TIF was rolling off that year, they levied a lot that year in order to make sure that they captured all those dollars as it was rolling off. We did the same thing. So we received, if you look here, additional dollars because that TIF rolled off to the tune of, if you look, so if you look down here on the EAV, we pick up almost this difference in here between the 89, almost 90 million, 110, 115, 119. So the TIF continues to grow. The property continues to be valuable. So knowing what the values are and what our tax rates are, you can sort of back in to what the contribution was in total to the district. Now this is where this gets arcane. These rates here, education, special ed, O&M, transportation, working cash, those are considered operating funds of the district. So those rates are capped, right? These rates down here play a part in the cap, but are not necessarily capped because we can extend them if we need to. Like you can see debt service went from 55 to 886, 828. My IMRF and Social Security levies also moved depending upon what I needed. These rates stay relatively constant because they're capped, and I'm really only picking up CPI and new property. That's the trick here. This is new property, just this year. So we captured all of it, and we picked up about as was correctly stated in some earlier referendum material, just in the O&M and Ed fund, we picked up about $4 million a year more. And that $4 million is embedded in the district's overall budget. That's where this becomes part of the problem. The first year we received the 4.2, we actually used it to buy land. So all the land acquisitions, everything that was supposed to happen happened out of that 4.2, just like it was supposed to, just like everybody said it was going to. We transitioned business managers over that budget cycle, and then another transition over another budget cycle. And pretty soon, the $4 million is now fully engrossed into the regular Ed and O&M budgets of the district. So we could isolate it. This goes back to Heather's conversation. We could take the 4.2 and pull it out. But that means I got to pull 4.2 out of Ed and O&M. So when we think about solutions, it's great. It did exactly what it was supposed to do the first year. It gets a little bit tricky as we go forward. But we can continue to look at that from an isolating standpoint if we need to look at that in order to continue with construction projects. Questions?
So it became a part of, it should have been isolated and its own piece, but it became a part of the culture and the climate of that budget.
Correct. And we, to good purpose, used that money. I mean, this was occurring over the period of time where the district was intentional about wanting to make sure that it was adding student programming, intentional about what it was doing with its teaching contracts and its other bargaining contracts to make sure that we were doing all of the right things. This was not like this was money that got thrown into a well someplace and wasted. It just simply became a part of the district's overall budget. So pulling it out of the budget after 2 years of having it in the budget would mean you'd feel it coming out of the budget now. This isn't, it's definitely got value with respect to the totality of what happens in the education fund and the O&M fund.
I remember these conversations around this 4 million. So my question is, if we leave, is that part of one of the options, leaving that alone and not affecting?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, yes.
Okay, then
So
can wait.
I wanted to answer this because it was sitting out there. It was a part of the public conversation around the referendum. You know, it is what it is at this point, but to pull it out becomes a problem. And so we wanted a solution recommendation that did not disrupt what we were trying to accomplish from an educational standpoint. Is that the questions? All right, so quick overview on the situation, just so we can have everybody taking the same space here. So construction financing task. So this is the task to really get us through the financing, right? We've got to meet the current and future contingency needs for all the projects. So right now, I want to say we're at almost $3 million in owner contingency that's left for all the projects. Let me see, I just wrote it down. So from a contingency standpoint, we have about $1.3 million left in owner contingency. We have about $3.3 million left in CM contingency. Again, as we've gone through these projects and we've made changes, we've had to address situations that had not been anticipated when we did the original bidding. We have used the contingency. So it's a part of construction. It's what happens. We need to complete what we had said we were going to do with respect to the $25 million. So that's built into the future budgets. Okay, so we're actually, and again, for clarity's sake, the board this year is moving 14 million. That's already been built into the budget. Next year, we'll move 10. And the reason it's not the full 25 has to do with the food service, because I can't transfer out of food service. We do need, as a part of this financing task, to come up with an answer for this $14 million shortfall mismatch. As we look at construction, we also have a district financial task, right? We need to manage the reduction in the fund balance reserves and the days cash on hand that are just normally going to occur when we pull 14 million out. So, this is just a part of prudent financial practice. This isn't anything that no one was expecting out of the business office. This is not anything that was unexpected as it relates to what the superintendent or anyone else within the cabinet was expecting. We knew that these things were just a part of the conversation. We need to identify the limited budget reductions in 21, given the existing financial commitment. So what that means is there is always room to make sure that the budget is being reviewed and managed. And 21, we are already in the middle of 21. We are almost 6 months into 21. There are only a few things that you're able to do quickly when you're this far into the fiscal year's budget. So we just have to continue to do what we're supposed to do, which is to continue to identify fiscal prudency. Do we need this? Do we not need this? How does this help? How does this not help with respect to education? We need to review the potential aspects of the broader and deeper budget cuts coming for 22 and beyond if we need to do them, right? So we already know, because we've had these conversations, we have issues potentially sitting out there with the state. We have issues potentially sitting out there with the feds. I'm more confident in what's going to happen locally because we've sort of seen some preliminary assessment data. But that still doesn't fix the $30 million that I have tied up between the state and the federal government. So we need to have degrees of things that we're comfortable looking at as we go into 21 and 22. And then, again, to Elizabeth's earlier point, we need to reestablish that long-term capital maintenance improvement plan so that we can start setting up those projects and we can start making sure that we've scheduled out those maintenance projects and repair projects in an appropriate way, and that we keep up with the plan. So just because we maybe won't do something until 22 doesn't mean that we need to skip 2 years of that project plan. We need to make sure it's updated and make sure it's brought forward. So here's the options that we've basically laid out. So these are, and this is not rocket science by any stretch of the imagination. This is just plain old common sense. At the very tip top of this, in all of these options, the board is going to maintain its commitment to do the transfer. We are not going to have an option that backtracks from that board's absolute adherence to the public with respect to the referendum commitment to move that money. But we do need to look at some other ways to handle the 14 million. So option one would be straight up. We just use all of our fund balance to be able to do that. And we'll talk more deeply about what that means. But high level, 14 million of fund balance reserves, probably coming only out of the ed fund. The O&M fund doesn't have enough revenue fund balance remaining right now in it after COVID to be able to support any kind of heavy contribution. And I don't want to take that fund down too much because we have a lot of buildings. And at any given point, I could lose a boiler, I could lose lights, I could lose brickwork. I mean, parking lots, anything could happen. This means we would have to use the budget to preserve as much cash flow as possible, which would be significant budget reductions in 22 and 23 as we start working across that. I don't know that there's much to be able to pull out of 21. You're basically eating at the peripheral edges of the budget at that point, which aren't where the bigger dollars are. Those are going to be in how we look at programming. Option two is an all borrowing resource option. We would basically issue a $14 million debt certificate. We'd provide for the additional financing to construction. It would be that money sits in Fund 60. The debt service payments are made from the education fund, so they become a part of the annual budgeting process, and we will talk through what those expenditures look like. Option 3, which is the one I'm recommending because it's both financially prudent and allows us to take advantage of the rate market we've got available to us right now, which is basically cheap money. Use a combination of $4 million in fund balance reserve and do a $10 million debt certificate borrowing. That fixes our $14 million. Budgeted debt service comes out of the ed fund, and then the O&M and the ed fund activities will be used to create the additional $2 million. Most of that coming from the education fund. So $2 million one year, $2 million in another year. So when we look at the all fund balance, this is sort of a snapshot, high level, again, of what it looks like to help everybody sort of visualize it. So in 21, we would transfer a total of $21 million. So I would readjust the budget when we do the budget amendment for 21, and I would pull, because remember the timing, I need to have this really in play by the end of 22, all the 14 million in total. So I would adjust the 21 budget for the 21 million. 14 we've already committed, this would be an additional 7. In 22, we would budget a transfer of 17 million out of the ed fund, the 10 million that was originally committed, and then another 7. So you can see the ending 20 fund balance at 56 million in the ed fund goes all the way down to 18 million when we get to fiscal 22. This is where this gets tricky doing this option, beside the fact pulling $14 million out of the ed fund over 2 cycles is a fairly significant lift from just a budgeting standpoint. It really is about cash flow. So if you don't take anything away from this presentation, board members, rip this page out, tuck it in your folder of board information, because this is one of those really handy talking points to just make sure you always have. Right now, we're running about 2.6 million per payroll cycle. So in months where I've got 2 pay cycles, I'm spending about 5.2 million. Last month, which was a 3-month pay cycle, we paid 7.8 million. The next time I have a 3-month pay cycle is going to be July of 21. Every month, we also run 2 accounts payable check runs, which total about 4.8 million, and we do 1 utility check run that's about 1.1 million. So every single month in this district, we run about 11 million to almost $14 million out. So if you think about the 18 million in the fund balance reserve, and then I only have 14 million that goes out because I've hit a July 3-month pay cycle, you can understand quickly why this gets to be a cash flow problem. Board policy on fund balance reserves, I just want to quickly go back through this because this was an unfinished item from, I know Guy did a couple presentations for the board. We need to finalize this. The existing board policy is 15 to 20% of annual expenditures. We do need to go through this policy and sort of realign it based on where the board wants to land with respect to ISB and the GFOA. Their standards are basically fund balance to revenue. And you can see here, this is sort of the ISB classifications of recognition, and then you can see that days cash on hand. Now, we are in excess right now of 180 days cash on hand, so we're in good shape. But the minute I pull all that fund balance out and we bring our cash balances down, we are not going to be up at that top level anymore. We'll be somewhere significantly lower than that, probably in that 30 to 89 day category. Questions on that option? Okay. Option 2, doing all borrowing. So right now, money is inexpensive. Those of you that have businesses or have been doing a mortgage know you can actually do a pretty good job getting some fairly inexpensive money. 5-year Treasury notes closed today at a 0.38. The 10-year Treasury closed at a 0.85, almost a 0.86. So super inexpensive to borrow. Tax-exempt entities also get the benefit of being able to borrow even less than commercial borrowers just because of the tax exemption status. So borrowing in a situation like that to really establish some leverage isn't necessarily a bad idea. If you borrowed $14 million, you would take care of all of it. Debt certificates in Illinois are similar to computer leases or bus leases. They're not a part of a referendum or a voter authorization because basically the board is doing it as a part of their budgeting, and you're making the payment out of the regular annual budget process. So you're not asking taxpayers for anything else. You're just simply rearranging how the cash flow is handled within the district from the debt standpoint. Average maturity range that we had sort of started to think about was maybe 10 years. That's just a round number. We have not really confirmed maturity with any particular firm. Banks like 10 years, but they'll take less if they like the credit. The approximate debt service on 14 million is about 1.6 million annually. So again, you can sort of see a rough layout. We just use 2% as a placeholder. It's higher than what it would need to be. It probably is going to be closer to 1.5, maybe 135, 140. But 2% sort of takes care of all the cost of issuance and all the other things. Estimated debt service, we said 1.6 over 10 years. The principal received at closing would be 14 million. Gets deposited in the capital projects fund, which is basically the construction account. Interest is paid over 10 years, and that's 1.6 million. Cost of issuance is paid from proceeds, so the district isn't paying anything more. Typically, debt certificates are always sold to local banks. Local banks like these. It's their way to participate in borrowings without having to necessarily deal with the crowded traditional bond market. So they're usually big buyers of these. It's considered an unsecured borrowing because there is no tax that is associated with this, and no voter authorization is required. Debt service is just paid for out of the regular operating budget. So if we look at what happens if I just do that, you can see where the fund balances are. Really, the fund balances stay within the same projection as what we would assume were we not actually, assuming all things were equal and we had a zero-based budget, no revenue, no excess. From a surplus standpoint, we go 56, 42, 32, which is what the district anticipated when it was doing the original conversations around the referendum. Option 3, which is the one I'm recommending, is we need the 14 million. We still continue to do the regular transfers that we had talked about earlier for the 24 million, but the district would issue 10 million in debt certificates, and it would transfer 4 million from available ed fund reserves. So as an example, in 21, and this gives us a little more flexibility, and I'll go through this in a second, but to keep apples and oranges together correctly, fiscal 21, I'm going to transfer the original 14 plus 2. Fiscal 22, I transfer 10 plus 2. And then you can see where your fund balances are, 56, 40, 28. The benefit of doing it this way is that I could get into Chris's point earlier, fiscal 23, and be able to budget out that way, because 4 million is a lot less. And that probably looks like my tail pieces as I'm getting close to the end of construction for punch list items. So that gives me even more flexibility to build into the budget as I'm looking to do those transfers. But it really puts the onus on the district to keep a little sort of skin in the game, if you will. It requires that the district manage the construction projects because we're not 100% fully funded, and manage its budget because we know whatever we need, we are going to have to pay for out of fund balance reserves. So we have incentive to stay engaged in cost containment around the construction projects, but we have a little more flexibility with respect to how we start pulling that out of fund balance. And again, this is what this looks like. The small chart to the side is sort of a visual then of what it looks like in terms of interest, total interest paid, which is about 1.1 million on a $10 million borrowing. So general recommendations overall, the board is going to be seeing 2 sets of contractual budget increases coming at it, one in December, one in January. Centennials will come in December, Edison's will come in January. These are increases, contractual increases to the existing budget amounts. Use option 3 to do the combination of the borrowing and the fund balance reserves in order to make sure we've covered the 14 million that we're projecting we've got a mismatch on. Use the 1% sales tax surplus to continue with the district-wide capital maintenance improvement projects, create budget report all the way through, knowing that fiscal 22 is the first year that those funds are going to be available. Finalize the conversation on board policy on the fund balance reserves. Continue developing with the board a board policy for days cash on hand, because those 2 policies really go together. And then continue the budget planning for 22 and 23 with the expectation that surpluses are going to be used to support operating fund balances. In other words, now that we've pulled them down, we can work on how we want to build them back up or what we want to use surpluses for, right? So the intent is to budget for some surpluses that help support fund balance. Okay, questions on the recommendations? Seth, anything?
Kathy?
I just was curious, if we were to do any borrowing, how quickly might we do that? Just wondering, because who knows how long interest rates will stay this low.
Yeah, so that's a good point. I think there's been some noise that's starting to pop into the financial market about inflation. I think we've probably got a window that takes us through the next quarter at least, maybe through the spring. You have to get, obviously, through the transition period. The news that Janet Yellen is stepping in at Treasury as the preferred choice makes for a difference, right? She's a little more careful about wanting to be too much of a, she walks a fine line between being a hawk and being a dove. So her fiscal policies are going to be a little more balanced. I think that there's an absolute willingness on the part of the market to admit that it's going to take some time to repair COVID damage. It's offset by the fact that the people that have won really big. So there is probably going to be some impact to businesses as sort of tax policies get unfolded and people start sort of seeing some of the financial policies that come out. So I think you're going to have a couple of cross currents. That won't settle itself out till we get into, I would say, that Marchish timeframe, which coincides with really the state coming back in. The fact that the state didn't come in for session during the veto session really pushes back a whole lot of conversation that the state has to have. And so they're going to jam all of that into late January, February as they start working through the budget. And they're really not going to have a solution to any of this till we get to April. By April, right before tax season is generally, I would expect for things to get super hot. So I think we've got a window. We don't want to wait too long. But we don't have to make a decision immediately, right? So we've got some time to sort of think this through for the next couple weeks for sure.
Heather?
You mentioned in your slides that no voter authorization is required.
Yep.
For this your suggestion. Can you speak to any evidence you have about when we've borrowed like this in the past or other districts that you're aware of that have borrowed like this? how it's, any information you could shed light on regarding how it's been executed before, when you're making this suggestion out of some amount of reasons, not which excludes your expertise, but is there background in making this choice before that you could speak to a little bit
So
to give
a
us
lot
some
of districts-
insight?
Right. A lot of districts do debt certificates because they don't require voter authorization. Really, what they're doing is they're leveraging their cash flow, especially when money is inexpensive to borrow. And they can sort of repace, if you will, how they want to make the expenditure. If, to Kathy's point, you'd suddenly see a huge spike in inflation, realistically, it's not going to alter that expense very much. It's just the emotional attachment of going from 2% to 6% feels big. So you'd want to monitor that. But for most school districts, this is an appropriate way for them to be able to leverage their cash flow without necessarily having to do heavy cuts. And it's especially good if they're using it to do literal capital project behavior, right? So they know, a lot of times you'll see districts do this for very large, intensive technology updates, right? So when a district is doing a $5 million technology offering, a lot of times they'll do a debt certificate in order to be able to just get it started and get it underway, and then they sort of pace out the repayment. So for districts, this is an efficient way to do it. What's not always efficient if you do a big debt certificate. So there are districts that have literally built entire schools. So they'll go and issue $40 million worth of a debt certificate. That gets tricky because you're getting into a different group of buyers then, right? You want to be able to get a bank that wants to buy this because you like keeping it local. Banks know who you are. They want your business. This is a way for them to get their foot in the door. It's not too big. It's not too small. It's sort of like Goldilocks right in the middle there. And so, again, there's an aspect to this where sometimes it's difficult for a school district to do it. In this particular case, you're not going to have that kind of an issue just because it's just about the right size for a lot of different buyers and banks to swallow. And then from a taxpayer standpoint, because it's just budgeted into their regular budgeting, the assumption is that the district isn't, quite honestly, is smart enough to be able to figure out how to make the payment. So they know how to do their budget on a regular basis.
One other follow-up question. Don't we have a rating from IASB, and do any of these get affected or impacted by this?
So
Any of these choices change our rating?
we have a profile score from ISB that is dependent upon those 5 factors that I had on that one slide. So when we start to pull our fund balance reserves down naturally, we're going to slip, right? We're going to go into that next category down. And the board's been aware of that for a while. What we do, and we have plenty of debt capacity, right? So that's the other thing. I've only utilized 48% of my debt capacity. So borrowing another $10 million isn't going to throw the debt capacity number off. So that won't count against us. It also prevents us, doing a borrowing like this probably preserves our Moody's and S&P credit rating, which is more of that national AA conversation that we wanted to have. The biggest thing that's going to impact the school district's AA is really the state, right? So where the state goes, the school district's rating is going to go too. So that's kind of out of our hands at this point, but the debt certificate won't affect adversely what's happening to the ISB ranking or profile score. When or if we would actually do the pay it full option, which is option 1, you absolutely will affect what's going to happen with ISB. You'll probably drop two levels because your days cash on hand will come down and you're going to be super tight on your fund balance. Seth?
If I had one question on that. So when did the district last issue?
So remember, you sold bonds in sort of that January timeframe of 2020.
No, I'm talking about issue a debt service bond. It would have been before us. We've never done this as a board.
You guys have not done debt certificates. You did do the working cash bond. You did the alternate revenue bonds when the countywide
Yep.
sales tax passed, right? So that that was predicated on the fact you were going to use those resources to repay those bonds. So that was a different aspect.
Okay.
And those had to go to the voters through the non-referendum process. The working cash went through the non-referendum process. This is just like when we buy computer leases. I mean, we've bought probably $2 million over the last couple of years worth of computer leases. Buses, same thing. It's based on our credit worthiness with the lender that's participating in the financing with us.
And so is there, back to the, I'm still stuck on that 4 million that's in the climate and culture, which I can live with, because really, if you take that off, it's 10 million. We're going to, if we're preserving that 4, leaving it to programmatic pieces because we don't want to affect it,
Right.
that increases us to 14. Because we don't want, there's no painless way to pull that back out to do what it should have been doing.
No, not if
Okay.
we're going to do the full piece of it.
And moving forward, we probably don't ever want to adjust that, or do we?
That's a board conversation
Okay.
as we proceed forward with programming and where the district wants to go in terms of its financial position long-term, right? So
Okay.
the board may want the option to come back, let's say for grins and giggles, that the board comes back in and says, we want to start a program that really benefits the residents to the north of that TIF. Because that TIF really drove them out of homes, maybe it displaced them, maybe it changed the demographic, and we want to be able to come back in and do that. So that might be an opportunity for the board to say, hey, that money that came off the TIF, let's find a way to redeploy it so that we can maybe deploy it this way. So the board always has those options, and we know now what that TIF looks like. There are other TIFs that the city has. We have another one that's coming off in a couple of years as well, that we're going to want to be able to take advantage of. So there's plenty of opportunities for us to talk about strategies for programs that are going to really help students that we could maybe redeploy the TIF dollars to help do, right? And allocate it out that way, because we feel that that's an important program that we want to get to.
And you speak to the heart of what the board's been working toward. Okay, and then
Oh, I think, does Elizabeth have a?
if we don't use that 14, let's say I know you're building in contingencies. If we don't use it, does it immediately go back toward that debt service?
We can use it to immediately go back to debt service, or we can add the projects that Paul didn't do this year and next year so that we can start moving on those too.
So there's flexibility
There's
to
some
that.
flexibility, you're right.
Okay.
That's a decision that the board makes at the time that we get there.
Okay, got it. I'm sorry. Okay, Elizabeth, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so the first year that the $4.2 million that was taken from the downtown TIF, and that money was used to buy land, correct?
Correct.
Who made that decision?
The board at that time knew, because they hadn't quite gotten to the referendum process yet. So they knew that when that TIF money came off, they wanted to use it towards referendum projects. It was a part of the board's commitment to the taxpayers. And so to get projects started while they were waiting to get through the referendum process, it made a ton of sense for them to go ahead and say, we know we need to clear these pieces of property around Central, for example. And now they had the opportunity to be able to do that. So it was helpful to the taxpayers because it was less money that the taxpayers had to worry about with respect to the referendum question itself.
So that first $4.2 million was used to buy land. Did the board at that time make a decision about how the future dollars would be used?
So I don't have the exact, I mean, and the board members that were there at the time can certainly correct me if I'm wrong. I'm assuming that the intent was that that money was going to be used over those successive couple of years to help contribute towards the referendum project.
That's accurate, because it was placed in O&M for that reason. So it would be drawn. In fact, it was Kathy Shannon, if you go back to those board meetings, it was board member Shannon who said, we need to have a very public conversation because it was in perpetuity. We knew this was going to be every year, and we placed it in O&M for that reason.
Yep.
And then it went to the Ed Fund?
So the land got purchased out of the Ed Fund, and the money came back during the budgeting process back into the Ed Fund to cover the expense that came out of the Ed Fund. So it was just it was an interfund, looks like it was just interfund movement at the time. And again, you got to remember the timing of when all that was happening. So that would have been the spring of that year. So you were transitioning with business manager, and you're trying to do the amended budget, and it got lost in the amended budget process. Then you had another interim business manager. And then, I come in at the very end of 20 fiscal year. So we just amended the budget, and then now we're here.
So I still don't understand who bears responsibility for this, because I keep hearing culture and climate. It was put into the Ed Fund and it was used to buy things that it wasn't supposed to, even though I have also heard that the money that was used for things that the district needed, that were in the best interest of our students. So if now we're, coming back and saying, no, that money was not spent how the board wanted it to be spent, who bears responsibility for it not being spent the way it was supposed to be?
I'm not, Elizabeth, I'm just not sure. At this point, we're trying to do forensic accounting on something that had two business managers in the middle of it. And I think the intent was right the first year, right? So there was the spirit of the intent. I think as the transition between business managers was happening, as construction was getting going, as bonds were getting issued, just the sheer magnitude of the amount of pieces of the puzzle that were moving all at the same time, it just frankly got lost. And what ended up happening was the district's needs and the ability of the district to be able to look at how to finance those needs from a student perspective. There was a budget, and they worked to try to figure out how best to make sure that that budget did what it was supposed to do for kids. So I don't know that it was a situation where you would say, well, that person didn't do it. I think it was just a combination of timing, transition of people, and it just got lost. Honestly, I think it just got lost.
And to Elizabeth's point, you made a note earlier that there are items being purchased for the students' use out of the Ed Fund that aren't falling into this.
Correct.
So it's not like somebody took it out and took the money and it was spent frivolously. It's part of programming.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it's what's helped the district. We've bought our ability to be able to do textbook adoptions, our ability to do new technology acquisitions. All of that stuff has been made possible by the fact that we had the money in the Ed Fund that we did have. Right? We didn't have to do what a lot of school districts had to do, which is to say, oops, no, time out. Everybody has to share stuff, or we're going to start sort of creating levels of need with respect to technology and who was going to get assigned technology. We were able to do the technology upgrades that we had to do, be able to provide the technology servicing around all of those pieces of equipment, because we had the opportunity to have that money available to us as a course of the normal budgeting. So, it's definitely not from a construction standpoint. I think if you went back to 2016 and 17, it's not what the board had originally talked about doing. But at the end of the day, the greater good of making sure that students had what they needed in order to get through these last 2 years, for sure. Definitely that money got used from that standpoint.
Are you aware of any more TIFs that are coming? I'm assuming there's constant conversations with the city of Champaign. Are there more TIFs coming?
They have not talked about starting new TIFs, so we have a joint board review meeting coming up next week. So that'll give us some updates with respect to the existing TIFs and what they think is happening with the existing TIFs. One of them is rolling off. I want to say is it the North Campus TIF? Yeah, one of the TIFs rolls off. So we'll provide an update to the board once we get through the Board of Review meeting. And then I have not heard anything from the city. They have to advise us well in advance if they're thinking about starting a new TIF.
So we have a question from Neil. What if board caps TIF revenues and future difference is special programs rather than general budget?
There is no ability to create a sort of a separate fund balance, if you will, within the ed fund to do that. What it is it's an allocation when the board does a budget. So for example, if they say, we want to target a particular type of program for a group of students, and we want this project, this opportunity to look like this, then what you do is you budget for it. So it creates its own sort of sub-budget code, if you will. We can track it. The closest way to maybe think about that is some of the special projects around bilingual, for example, the equity programming that we've been asking for the district to participate in and conduct. So there's opportunities for the board to look at the money that way and parse it out, but not necessarily there's no opportunity to really create another fund. It has to stay within the ed fund.
That's actually a good question. It's interesting that we can actually be reacting to the money coming off the TIF and allocating it back to specific purposes. That's good information for boards to have.
Yep.
Any other questions? Dr. Baker?
Not a question. I would just ask, not ask even, but I am comfortable with the recommendation, I think, provided if we get any additional feedback from community members or finance committee, ROC, with moving forward. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you.
Just in closing, we had a couple more slides. We did want to talk about this because it's a natural conversation to have, which is the one about IPA as a general sort of concept and facility, just because unfortunately, it's the last project, so it's the easiest to spot right now. So sort of a quick history on IPA, the original voter authorization documentation made reference to the budget amount being $6 million. Back in March, after 5 separate public board meeting presentations where IPA and IPA programming was really super publicly discussed, I mean, even in St. Louis we heard about it, the board settled in on doing a project increase in order to accommodate the scope of the project that they had settled on as we got to that March 9th meeting. And that budget amount took the total budget for IPA up to $24.3 million. And again, there were a couple of key factors. One of the biggest ones really had to do with managing that student enrollment number, because you do have that bubble of students, especially for finance committee, because they haven't seen enrollment figures yet. But the board's well aware, ROC is well aware. There is a group of students that are starting to move through each grade level, and they're going to hit that middle school at some point here soon, and we need to be able to house them. And the current middle school space that we have available is definitely not going to be enough to sustain all of those students coming in. So one of the aspects of the IPA program is obviously to provide those middle school seats to be able to have that opportunity for the district. There's this question and answer that had occurred, which was settled on by the board, about making sure, and some definite positive statements about this, creating that equity and parity with all the elementary schools throughout the building. In other words, we didn't want to have elementaries where one of them got something and somebody else didn't get something, or somebody had aspects of the way that they were utilizing their building that another building didn't. It creates a very uneven process throughout the district to create sort of, if you will, winners and losers with respect to elementary school space. We also wanted to make sure that there was the provision of educational and racial equity for the multilingual students that are served at IPA. In other words, by creating this parity and equity around the district and allowing spaces that really positively serve that IPA program, you've now created a space for multilingual students to be able to have access to facilities in the same way that all students across the district have got access to those facilities. Elizabeth is here, Dr. Zola's here. Obviously, the board remembers there were a large number of meetings that were held publicly to really talk about the instructional space and what that instructional space needed to look like. And I don't know, Elizabeth, if you want to talk to how many meetings after the March 9th meeting occurred and sort of some of that part of the process?
Sure. So after all the 5 meetings that Linda mentioned leading up to the budget increase in March were all about programming and trying to decide what the scope of the project was going to be. And then once the budget increase in March was approved, then we moved into design. And so we've been in design since then. We're still in design. We're at the tail end. But we, work with Principal Kozovsky every day. We also work with O&M and food service and buses and teachers and other community stakeholders. We presented in June with the schematic design presentation and a budget that matched the 24.3. Then we worked throughout the summer to further develop the design. And then we were back in August with a design development presentation and an estimate that matched the 24.3. And now we are in final design right now. We're having meetings every single day. We had one last week with teachers talking about interior design of spaces, continuing to meet with O&M and all the other stakeholders. And we intend to come in December with a final design and an estimate. So since the board approved the budget in March, we've been twice to the board for milestone approvals, but then behind the scenes, dozens of meetings with various stakeholders as we develop the design to fit within the approved scope.
So again, I'm sorry, questions? Okay. I would not be the CFO if I didn't put the Debbie Downer statement on here. We do need to talk through as a part of the budget for 22, 23 and going forward, sort of the cost of building a building. I don't want anybody to assume that we're sitting back in the business office going, woo, we're going to have a new building, and we're not going to increase certain costs. So we know that utilities are going to go up. We know that we've got 2 buildings. We're going to have furniture. We're going to have classroom supplies. And depending upon how the building's programming develops, we're going to have to address staffing needs, right? And remember, part of this is driven by the fact we have more students coming in through the middle school. So this is not staffing because I have a bunch of new elementary school classroom spaces. This is because we have to create space to be able to handle student enrollment. So there's staffing considerations. Those start to come into play as the buildings are completed and as we see student enrollment and as it moves, which is not to say that it's a one-to-one, right? So staffing in any building is always complicated. And so those conversations are going to continue to take place, but I don't want anybody to assume that it's just a flat, there's never going to be a change in any expenditures, because there will be some expenditures that are definitely going to increase. And so that's part of the responsibility for finance, is to make sure that they've really set those budgets within the broader scope of the district's total budget. Okay.
Elizabeth?
I want to make sure I'm following. I've heard middle school mentioned a couple of times. Are we talking about the possibility of making IPA a K through 8 school? Or how does middle school work into this?
Go ahead. Sure.
So the project that was approved, builds the new 4-strand K through 5. We also, part of the project, we demolished the very western end of the existing building, and that's to make space for a new bus turn-in and car queuing. Just because we have such problems on Kirby, we need to get vehicles off the street. When the new building is built, K through 5 will move into the new building. The existing building will be used for middle school, 6 through 8. Kind of, I think, it was called the "if we build it, will they come" kind of option, to just see how is, now that we have a new building, K through 5, we have a placeholder for 6 through 8 addition. The 6 through 8 addition is not funded, so there won't be any additional classrooms in the new building for 6 through 8, but the old building will be used for middle school. If the program should go, then the new building is designed to take on that addition. It's cited in the site plan. All the utilities are ready to feed into that. But right now, the 6 through 8 will stay in the existing building when in 2022, when the new building is done, the 6 through 8 eighth graders will stay in the existing building. They're currently going into portables, starting, they're already, some are in there. If school were to be in session, they're in the portables. Next year, the 7th graders will be there, and then they'll move into the existing building when all the K through 5 moves into their new building.
And just confirming, these are all students, all the middle school students will have already been at IPA. These aren't middle school students from not IPA elementary schools, right?
Yeah, I guess I'd let Dr. Zola respond to that, because there's some criteria about joining IPA.
In general, there'll be students who are currently at IPA unless they're a Spanish-speaking student moving in, or a student who's previously participated in dual language. Those would be the exceptions.
Okay.
Any questions? Okay. All right, so just quickly, we looked at these options as we were looking for context around solutions for sort of the $14 million mismatch. So when we started this process and we really started looking at coming to the board with a recommendation, we did take into account what would happen if we somehow changed or altered the trajectory of what we were doing at IPA. So just moving forward with the current design is really what we've been talking about. At different points, we've talked to Elizabeth and her team about what happens if I pause it for a year just to let COVID sort of do its thing. And then we've talked about, is it even possible or feasible to reconfigure what's currently been designed, reduce the scope? What does that look like? How much does that really sort of throw plans that have already been made into just a skew? So the financial implications sort of rolled out like this. If we move forward, you've already heard the presentation, so we know what the answer there is. If we pause, just the pause of the year causes the projected increase to the budget to go up by about 1.2 million. Now that assumes sort of everything stays status quo. Where we have potential uncertainty around the $1.2 million is what a post-vaccine COVID environment looks like. Mostly being what happens if the University of Illinois or Urbana 116 suddenly turn on the heat and start building. Because once they start pulling labor out of the labor force and contractors out of the contractor force, all of us are going to start paying more money. So the 1.2 could be higher, but for right now, we're projecting a 1.2 cost if we pause, which in relationship to spending 1.2 in interest expense sort of seemed like a fair trade-off for us to be able to get the building that we had been all sort of working towards. If it was to go on pause, we'd have to have the same conversation, because we're not talking about taking money off the table from an expenditure standpoint. We're just changing the timeframes of when we need it. So that would, continue to just give us more time to look at where we find money to pay for it, given what we're looking to find, not a lot of extra options. So basically, we just stall the conversation off for a year and we spend another $1 million. It would allow And in fairness and in full disclosure, it does allow a new superintendent time to put input into that project. So stalling for a year, the one aspect of this that's non-monetary is really having a new superintendent who's involved in the project. The con to that is a lot of new superintendents have already got their plates full. And just from experience, most new superintendents kind of want that part of the stuff done. Unless they are working from a brand new, we just passed the referendum in April, and a new superintendent is coming in July 1, where it's a whole brand new project, and they know what they're getting, they're signing up for when they come into the district. So there's pros and cons both to that from a superintendent standpoint. If we reconfigure the project, yes, we could probably reduce the overall cost of the project. We would allow a new superintendent to have input into that project. We may see increases in some costs due to delay. In other words, it's not as simple an equation as saying I'm going to cut 10 million out of the IPA project and assume that the project that I get is really a reduction of 10 million. It may only end up being a reduction of 6 million because other costs go up, and because I also have the additional cost of having to do redesign, rebidding, moving things around. And depending upon the configuration of the plan, I still do not have an answer for the middle school student enrollment that's coming in. So remember, at a lot of the base conversation here is the actual fact we have students that are starting to move through the system that will need a seat. So we would still have to come back in and have a conversation about where those students would go as they start coming through the system. So as we looked at some of these financial implications and weighed them out, it led us back to stay the course as the recommendation, complete the projects that we've progressed with, and find a solution for the 14 million shortfall.
What's the current enrollment of sixth graders at IPA?
Oh, I forgot to pull that, sorry. I had it, we'll have to come back.
Yeah, we'll have to get that update for you. I think we thought we had pulled it and.
You did, okay.
Yep,
Ran
we'll
out
get
of
it for you.
time. Sorry.
Linda said she'll get it. She forgot to bring it with, she pulled it, but she'll bring it. Or you can provide us as an update. Okay.
So again, this is just both for the community, for the ROC Committee, Finance Committee, board members. If you've got finance questions, absolutely feel free to call me or email me. Construction follow-up questions, absolutely feel free to call Elizabeth. And if you've got general questions or comments, especially around programming, Dr. Zola is going to be your best contact person for that kind of piece. I guess in closing, what I would say is I stand by the recommendation to do both the $10 million debt certificate and the fund balance drawdown of 4. We can manage those two processes. I think there's some other good pieces of information that came out of this meeting around looking at what we do long-term from a strategy standpoint with TIF revenues and TIF dollars and opportunities there. And I do want to make sure we are continuing to fund that long-term capital improvement plan. So, again, tonight was a no-action conversation for the board. This was really for information only. But I did want the board to be prepared because December's coming up, and we are going to be bringing Centennial. We are going to be bringing IPA. Then in January, we'll be bringing Edison. And as we walk through the next couple of months, we will be, depending upon how everyone feels, bringing a resolution or an idea about how can we actually do the debt certificate financing.
And Mr. K will join that meeting, that call around programming at IPA?
I'm sorry.
Yes, he's
Yes.
planning on attending the December board meeting.
Any other questions? Chris?
There's my unmute button. Just kind of following what Janina said, I'm comfortable with the recommendations. And then I think we carry on with IPA. which is also your recommendation. So I just wanted to voice that support and my thanks to the team, to Elizabeth and Linda for this presentation. I think this is a good idea. I know we have some ROC members, and Seth and Michelle I see are with us too. So thank you to that team and everybody working on this and having this meeting. So
Heather?
And I want to echo a little bit where the direction Chris is going. I think it's never easy, Linda, to deliver the news you've delivered this evening. To send this email to lend a lens that you have. I hope going forward, as we identify the next superintendent to succeed Susan, we identify ways to be more preventative. We can be more, focused on investment and endowment and things that we can do that can prepare us more sufficiently to meet and address questions like this, because I want to be in service to the board that sits here 10 years from now, as much as I want to be in service to the members of this board and the community we serve today. So thank you, Linda. It's never easy to give these updates, and I'm sure we have a million questions and none at the same time, but I do want to tell you that I want to hear more about how we can be prescriptive going forward.
Dr. Baker?
I guess regarding IPA, I don't know that there was a recommendation given towards that, so I don't want to say carry on. I would be interested in, I don't know if the district has a recommendation regarding IPA with those three options, or if that's something to come in the December board meeting, but that's something that I would think would possibly follow potentially after hearing some feedback and input along with those enrollment numbers.
Chris?
I just thought I maybe heard Linda say there at the end that the recommendation was to continue with all the meetings and having approved. So I apologize if I misunderstood that. So.
No, the recommendation coming from finance is to continue moving forward with the path that we've got. So we've got a solution for the 14. The board had a number of meetings, public meetings, as well as Elizabeth and her team having a lot of public meetings with stakeholders during the design process. That pulling off IPA right now for some of the fundamental reasons we just talked about wouldn't be a recommendation if we've got a path to be able to provide that financing. If we didn't have a path to provide financing, I'd be up here recommending something differently. But we do have a path to provide the financing, and there's been a lot of work that clearly has been put into this by both the board and the community and capital projects. There's nothing that's fundamentally changed for pulling off the recommendation to continue forward with IPA. Dr. Baker, does that help?
Kind of. I think I'm very hesitant to agree with that, considering that there's so many considerations that we have no idea about. I think that, I've always been at a point of pausing on this particular project because there are going to be effects, and I understand that potentially we have a pathway forward, but I don't know that we know what to expect even in the next 6 months. And right now our children aren't even in buildings, and so I would rather us start thinking and including some conversations around what staffing looks like. I think that RIFs and other conversations are going to have to occur in the spring. And so to go ahead and move forward with this project with us not even starting on it relatively soon, I think is very, I don't know if it's the wisest decision right now. So that's where I sit.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Baker. Any other board input? Elizabeth?
I'm kind of echoing what everybody else has said. I support the recommendation as far as the $10 million and the $4 million, $4 million coming from the fund balance and $10 million being taken out as for debt service. I'm not saying that right. I want to I don't know that the board needs to be reminded of it per se, but I think it's something we need to make sure we always have at the front of our mind, that all Black lives matter, Native lives matter, and budgets are moral documents. So I'm encouraged that these recommendations seem to be coming from a place of honoring our resolution that racism is a public health crisis, and ensuring that we are making decisions that are in the best interests of our students and families, especially those who are furthest from opportunity and who have the fewest options. So I don't know that anything necessarily needs to be changed, but I hope that we continue keeping that at the front of our minds.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Bruce, Kathy? Doesn't mean you have to. This is gonna come back to us in December.
Right. I would add that I am in support of the recommendations, and I appreciate all the work that was put into them.
Yeah, I was just going to echo the same thing. I do appreciate the work and the drilling down of this budget, and making sure that we understand what we're facing and what we're dealing with. I'm glad to see that there is a path forward. I look forward to December. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. And you have the last slide, which is attached to the presentation. For any community member that needs to reach out, there's contact info. Rock, you can send those questions to Elizabeth, as always, Stegmeyer, and she will get back to you. And again, this is just a report that does not need to take any action. And Linda, I can't thank you enough. Seth, Elizabeth, the entire finance office, to Heather's point, it's never fun to stand up there and deliver this, but it's cohesive, it's understandable, and it's relatable to those who aren't in the finance world, and the terminology that you use helps everyone be able to appreciate what the district is doing and what the board is doing. So thank you so much. We do not need to move into executive session, so that will move us to item 7, which is an adjournment. Oh, I'm sorry. I was cruising right along. I'll move us to item 4, which is public comment. And we do not have any cards, nor do we have anyone in attendance for this meeting. Now I'm good. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Shannon Vasquez. Tammy, would you please call roll?
Miss Shannon?
Yes.
Miss Vasquez?
Yes.
Miss Armstrong?
Yes.
Dr. Baker?
Yes.
Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Mr. Kleppel?
Yes.
Miss Soteropoulos?
Yes.
Motion carries 7-0. The time now is 7:35, and we want to wish all of our students and families and community members a very happy break and a happy Thanksgiving. And the time now is 7:36. We are in adjournment.
Do well, everybody.